White Hetero Patriarchy, a term I'm pretty sure you've never heard before. Another shooting in the US this week, and gender-based violence increasing daily. How the two even connect will surprise you. We're all affected by it every single day. Today I sit to Thando Gumede discussing white hetero patriarchy.
I kinda like you.
You know, the thing though is I think feminism gets a bad rap.
It does, yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of people, even women, total understanding of feminism is, no, we're going to fight for everything that has to do with womanhood and everything around it, regardless of who we trample on.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that you mentioned the ideology, because we don't realize we may start a space and come in with the same mindset that we were groomed to believe is part of our life. We are groomed to believe that patriarchy is part of every part of a woman's existence, when in fact we're not even creating a whole set of rules by how we live. So it's easy to run, like for instance, a business with that same mindset, and then it fails, and not understanding that I needed to have a really pure ideology for this without the influence of patriarchy, without the influence of racism and classism and any of those things. I think many people don't even understand that needs to be foundational in anything that we do. But in South Africa in general, because these topics are now coming up and we're delving a little bit more into it, do you think that as a society it's really going to be paid attention to this time, or is it just we're saving face for the people who call themselves feminists and who are talking about this, and then eventually we'll just slip back into our old behaviors and ways?
You know, I think that the future of South Africa is literally in the hands of young women of color. And it's really been beautiful to see how a lot of us are taking agency and are refusing to back down. So for me, it's always about understanding what you can do where you are.
Yes.
So for me, I'm saying I'm an educator. I'm a feminist educator, and I'm going to school you on the things that you need so that you can overthrow the system.
Yes.
So, like in creating the Ubuntu Studies Online Academy, it's not about me.
Yes.
It's not about my ego. It's about me saying my existence is going to be in me pouring all that I've done, pouring all that I know into young people so that they can use the knowledge as tools that will enable them to identify incidences of white heteropatriarchy, but also to adequately fight those systems.
Yes.
And this is essential because white heteropatriarchy has always deemed education and consciousness as its enemy. That's why we've been paralyzed in our education and our learning. You know, slave owners would lynch you if you dare open the book, you know, and the only book that they were allowed to open was the Bible, which is
and the
why
Bible
we
was
have,
also retracted.
Yeah, which is why we have such a toxic relationship with the Bible, because quite frankly, it was the only text that we were allowed to learn. But it was also used to oppress people of color.
Because I know a lot of it was redacted
Yeah.
in the early days, specifically to keep this idea that, the white system needed to function in its entirety, so we don't need you fighting back. So everything that says you need to speak up was removed.
Exactly. And remember that education means articulation. If I'm educated to understand something, it means that I can identify it when it happens,
Yes.
but it also means that I can talk about it and articulate myself when that incident happens.
Yes.
And so, you know, us being blinded, us being ignorant is not by accident. It is very well thought out.
Yes.
That's why even today in 2020, our education system sucks. And everything else around us is collapsed.
Yes.
Because, we wanted to make sure, not only historically, but even now, whiteness wants to make sure that blackness doesn't progress. And the most advanced societies also have advanced education systems. There's a very good correlation between those two things. So what we are learning, what we're being taught, what we're not being taught, and
That's
also how
one.
we're being taught things are all systems of, all functions of white heteropatriarchy that are created to silence, because silencing is an enabler for oppression to continue.
Yes.
That is why when we initiate someone violently, when closer boys go to the mountain to go and become men, no one knows what is spoken about
Yes.
there. People who experience gender-based violence will tell you that the perpetrators of their violence did not say, okay, look, if you want to talk about this, then you can, but I highly recommend that you don't.
Yeah.
They say, if you dare tell anyone, I'll kill you, or I will kill your sibling, So a lot of people are molested and they're afraid to come out because this person said, I'm going to be held accountable. I'm going to be held accountable for what has happened to me. And so that's used to mute people. So, for me, my responsibility is to unsilence people, is to give people a voice through knowledge, because I can't do it on my own. Everyone needs to understand what their function is.
Yes.
And to play their role where they are, as I said before. So my function is to recognize that, okay, this is what I can do, this is what I'm going to do.
And I'm holding myself self-responsible and committed to doing it.
And I'm giving myself to you. We need to give ourselves to each other, because we've learned to protect ourselves.
Yes.
Like we now live for ourselves.
Yes.
And it's like, survival of the fittest, yo. But if we can come back to Ubuntu, which is
and the truth of it, because we're using that as the token.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But the true understanding of what Ubuntu actually means, no one is really educating themselves on it, and understanding how each and every person has their own personal responsibility to fighting the system.
Exactly. And remember that if we go back to pre-colonial times, and I don't want to romanticize our history as black people, our history as Africans, right? Because you also have problematic narratives.
Yes.
But before that, our history and our existence was embedded in us living for one another, us coming together so that the entire community can benefit.
Yes.
So if we want to conquer a system that wants to keep things for itself, where only one person can benefit, then doesn't it make sense that the thing that is going to contribute to dismantling that system is for us to give to one another?
Yes.
Even you creating this platform and making a space for us to have this conversation, this is you doing your work where you are, because these platforms and these spaces are muted. We don't see it. It's hardly there, and when it does happen, it's a function of tokenism. It's some white person saying, okay guys, we need to talk about racism.
We'll show it to them for 5 minutes and then
5 minutes.
move on.
Youth Month is coming, 1976, we need to show something there, and you never see that piece of history ever again. So, we need to remember, I think, two things. We need to remember that in order for you to destroy a system, you need to give a hair of the dog that bit you. So when you're hung over, right? When you're hung over, they say that the way to cure the hangover is to have a hair of the dog that bit you. So we are still hung over white heteropatriarchy. We're still hung over colonialism. We're still hung over whitewashed patriarchy. We're still hung over, queerphobia. And so in order for us to progress, we need to have a system that's going to be as intersectional
Yes.
as the system of oppression was. So for me, feminism, intersectional feminism, as well as equity, which is, and also or equity, which underpins intersectional
And
feminism.
I want to talk a little bit about equity after
Okay,
you finish.
Sure. Is probably the only antidote that we have.
Yes.
We need the intersectionality, So just going back to equity, I guess, and what is this elusive concept of equity?
What I actually also want to discuss is the difference between equality and equity,
Yeah.
because most people don't understand that there's actually a very large difference between the two of them.
Yeah. So unfortunately, our constitution is actually an equitable document. It is a document that speaks to a concept called substantive equality, which is the exact same thing as equity. But because the words were not necessarily used in the Constitution, people then are obsessed with equality and not equity. Because when you don't see something, you don't recognize it, it becomes blind to you.
Yeah.
So I think to a certain extent, the drafters of the Constitution need to take responsibility, or those who have the power to reconfigure the language of the Constitution need to take responsibility to say, maybe we need to change that and write the word equity and not equality, But, so equality and substantive equality, aka equity, are two fundamentally different conceptions.
Yes.
So I believe, and this is my own submission as someone who's in legal academia, someone who's been in the space for a while, that equality is just about treating people the same. Okay?
Yes.
So what it does is that it turns a blind eye to the history of a space. So it is a liberal form of social reform.
Yeah.
It is a liberal form of justice. It says, okay, folks, so we had inequality, so I think the best way to move forward is to just have equality, so you can come to the school regardless of who you are.
And we give everyone the same thing, even if you're in a lower,
Exactly. Everyone has, we have the same opportunities, so, but you see, substantive equality, also known as equity, and I'm going to refer to it as equity from now on. What it does is it does three things. It has three elements. The first is that it does the same thing that equality does.
Yeah.
Okay, so at first it says that if there is a school and you are a human being, so there's a school for human beings and you're a human being, you're allowed to attend the school.
Yes.
And the security guard at the front is not allowed to deny you access.
Yeah.
And it means that also I, as a person who's accessing that space, have got a responsibility to use the space in the manner it was intended to be used.
Okay, yes.
So you must have this, there must be the same function as well as you using it for an equal purpose, So the equality and the sameness element can be broken down further to say, you are not allowed to come into the space to come and use it as a tavern, to come and use it as a pub or a club. It's a school. It ought to be used as a space of educational engagement. And should you use it otherwise as a tavern or as a pub or as a club, then we will kick you out. And it would be right for you to be kicked out or for you to be denied access, right? But now equity does something beyond what equality says in two ways. And the second element says that you also have to contextualize. You have to recognize that these people who want to get into the school are not the same.
Yes.
They've got difference. And respect that inherently there is no one way of being human. We all have got diverse idiosyncrasies.
Yes.
So equality makes the era of thinking that we are the same, that we have no idiosyncrasies. But substantive equality and equity begins to say, hold up, this person uses a wheelchair. So when they get to the school, how are they going to maneuver themselves around? It says, even before that, how did that person living with a disability even get here?
Yes.
So it starts to build context, it starts to recognize backgrounds, and it starts to not only recognize, but appreciate and respect difference between people, you know. So, but now it's not good enough for us to respect people in theory, because you can be someone living with disability, and I'll be like, I respect you, and I totally acknowledge and I recognize you, you know.
But that doesn't really do anything for them.
Exactly. So, and this is where our society fails fundamentally. This is where the government just completely loses the plot, is with this third element. There has to be an intentional, purposeful effort to undo the injustices of the past,
Yes.
and to rebuild very painfully. It hurts, but we have to rebuild the future that we truly envisaged as is embodied in our constitution. What that means is that we have to undo past laws and legislations that were put into place to embed, social injustice. We have to challenge how societies, different aspects of society, have been configured. So it's not good enough for us to have people who are legal practitioners who were also judges during apartheid. I mean, those are things that have to be challenged.
Yeah.
Who were the people that were actually supporting apartheid that might actually still be functioning in our justice system,
And
in
we
the
haven't
judiciary?
asked those questions.
We need to ask those questions, but even asking it isn't good enough. It's to say, what is the consequence? What is the consequence if we find out that there is someone who is practicing in the judiciary who was participating in the system of white hetero patriarchy during apartheid, who is in the judiciary now and enabling white hetero patriarchy to continue to manifest itself? So this third element is where we really struggle as a society. And in law, when we were students, we were taught that there are requirements that have to be met in order for something to exist. So in order, for instance, for murder to be murder, it has to be the unlawful, intentional killing of another human being, right? And if there was no intention, then it's not murder anymore, it's something else.
Yeah.
If it is lawful, then it's not murder, it's something else.
Okay.
And the same rules abide with the principles of equity. If any of the elements, of the three elements that I just mentioned, don't exist, then it's not equity. So the fact that we have not been able to get to part number 3, to get to the third element in our society, means that the entire system collapses, and all we have now is equality. And even that, I think we struggle with. Even that, we struggle to allow people to enter into a space.
We struggle to even understand fully what that means, because even in the conversations we're talking about, we're looking for equal space where, we want to feel the same, but essentially we're also not even looking at the biases that were created before wanting to look the same, or our social economic status before that. We're just trying to fight for a little bit of space, but then earlier we were also talking about, and then I get to that space and then I'm not necessarily fighting for everyone else who's in the same position or was in the same position as me, because I need to hold on to that position. Earlier you were talking about silencing, and this is major right now. The different forms of silencing, how we are doing it to one another, how the system is doing it to us, how it's happening contractually to people. Do you think that there's an easy way to get around it, or are we going to be really talking about how silencing is happening within business? On social media, it's a big thing. with regards to using the law to silence people
Yes.
who are being hurt
Yeah.
by not only the silencing, but the things that you were saying on the sideline and are allowed to say because you're not being silenced. Do you think there's an easy way to get through these loops? And how do we educate people without harming them? Because that's like a big thing now. You say something to me, I feel emotionally triggered, when that trigger is your responsibility, not mine at the end of the day. How do we address this without it turning into it's you said and I said, and not coming to the table and really figuring out and breaking apart all of these things?
Well, I can't answer a question on silencing without going into gender-based violence, because I think gender-based violence is probably the biggest victim
Yes.
of the atrocities of silencing. So let me first begin by saying that gender-based violence is the most pervasive, the most common, and the most dangerous form of white heteropatriarchy. So white heteropatriarchy manifests itself in different ways, but the most important, I think, conversation that we need to have is the one around the most common dangerous manifestation, that is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is, unfair discriminations that create also biases and unfair privileges based exclusively on the premise of someone's sex, their gender, and their sexual orientation.
Yes.
And of course, a person's sex refers to their biological fact of whether they are male, female, intersex. And there's also research to the effect that there are even more sexes than that. But even if you're intersex, you are forced to fall into the category
Of male or female.
and female. And that in and of itself is a mechanism of silencing. Oh, there's no such
Yeah,
thing
don't
as...
say anything.
If you're not male or female, So, and then you've also got... so when we go to gender, gender is basically a social construct where it is about how I identify, in relation to other human beings. And so I can identify as a woman. I can be born a male, but I can identify in the broader social context as a woman, And then sexual orientation refers to how someone is biologically attracted to other human beings, or romantically, either romantically attracted or sexually attracted. And so when we talk about sexual orientation, you can be heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, the list goes on and on. And the reason why I use the word biological is because you don't choose how romantically attracted you're going to be to someone. You don't choose how sexually attracted you're going to be someone. It is a biological, chemical function in your body. So what we've done as a society is that we've created a space where we oppress people on top of being oppressed for other stuff. We're then further oppressed because of our sex, because of our gender, because of our sexual orientation. And this can manifest itself either physically, physical violence. It can manifest itself through sexual violence, economic violence. It can manifest itself through emotional, psychological violence. And then I also think that it can manifest itself, and this is my own personal submission, as what I like to call black gender-based violence. Because the truth is that my blackness, because of the system of white heteropatriarchy, my blackness is a huge part of how I'm going to experience gender-based violence. For instance, if I'm black, the likelihood is I'm going to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning so I can be at my employer's place at 7 or 8 o'clock. And in between all of that, I have to walk in the dark. I have to take multiple public transportation. And in between all of that, I have got heightened incidences of having to face patriarchy or heteropatriarchy. So in between that, I'm being called a prostitute or a whore or a
Being
bitch,
whistled at
being
or-
whistled at, you know. And of course, because I'm also black, I am paid the least in the workplace. So a black man would enjoy more money than me, a white woman would enjoy more money than me, but a black woman would have the least, and that's totally normalized. Now, going back to silencing, we have not been able to progress as people of color, and especially as black women, in the workplace, in the economy, because of silencing. So what happens is that we don't tell each other our pay slips,
That's a big one.
but more than that, our contracts tell us you are not allowed to divulge or to discuss it. So what happens is that you find out a couple of years down the line, like Johnny is earning more than moi, but also Sipho as a black man is earning more than me. I'm actually the one who's the most screwed in this place.
And then I'm the one who's more educated than even he is. But it's just, this is the way it is, and it's the way that it's accepted.
And people don't recognize that as violence. People think that violence is like me hitting you or me being like,
Yeah.
verbal about my violence. Oh, honey, violence is very sophisticated. Violence is invisible. I mean, look at, do you know that most domestic workers in South Africa don't even have a pay slip? So because they don't have a pay slip and because they don't have a contractual agreement that puts them, that says that this is your job title, this is what you do, this is how much you're being paid, as a result of that, and that's also a mechanism of silencing, as a result of us taking away these tools of enablement, the tools of the pay slip, the tools of the contractual agreement, it perpetuates silence because now you don't know, like, should I be talking about this job, but I don't.
But you know, that's actually really interesting because I was thinking about it a few months ago. A lot of our domestic workers are now foreign citizens, right? They're not South Africans by birth, and because we don't give them these tools, they can't claim for simple things like UIF. And our lockdown has happened, and all of them are struggling to even get a little bit of money just to survive throughout lockdown because they can't go to work. They don't have all the tools to submit to say that they have a job, and we are silencing them because they can't say anything.
So their employer is like, listen, if you talk, you're out of here. Silencing can be very covert, and it can be also very overt. Silencing can be me telling you that if you dare speak, then this is going to be the repercussion. But silencing can also be making me feel that I cannot empower myself, creating a set of circumstances around me that ensure that I cannot empower myself beyond my current experiences. So when you don't give someone a payslip and you don't give someone a contractual agreement, that is a form of silencing. Because what are you fighting against? We didn't agree on anything. Go look after the kids. All of a sudden, someone whose job was to just clean the house is now also being a nanny, but they're only earning 3,000 rand per month.
That's like actually so insane because it puts the whole conversation on silencing in broader light for me.
Exactly.
Because we've been focusing so much on there's a group of people who are silencing those of us who want to talk, and they're using the law against us and all those things. But then my question from the beginning has always been, how are we looking at how we are perpetuating the system within our own homes as individuals? Our belief systems are kind of creating this narrative around it, but then we're toying for a specific thing. That I've asked people that so many times in the last few months, and then it goes silent.
We are so complicit, and that's why I needed to define gender-based violence, because a lot of people say, don't call her a domestic worker, she's a helper, she's here to... No, honey, she's here to work.
Like she's the same.
She's here to work. It's a job. She ought to get paid appropriately. She's not here to come and you don't go to work and say, I hired Melise because she's just here to just come and help us out. She's going to just be kind of relieving, the burden of my shoulders. No, you bring in Melise as a consultant, and she's here to come and strategize. So, we use all of these words to try and mitigate the fact that actually you've got an employee in your house, and you ought to have equitable employee conditions to make sure that this person is empowered as a human being so that they can reach their full potential as a human being as is envisaged in our constitution. So even in our own homes, you know, when we as me as a black woman, I don't have a pay slip for my lightly colored or black domestic worker to be able to do their work and to empower themselves. I don't have a contractual agreement that makes sure that there is consensus between the two of us to make sure that her livelihood and her existence doesn't depend on how moody I am on the day, you know. So I think it's really important that we recognize that and call ourselves out. If you are a woman of color who is inherently victimized by the system of white heteropatriarchy, especially in the economy, especially in the workplace, ask yourself, how are you complicit in that in your own home and how you treat a person who's an employee in your own home?
Because in the same way, we are teaching our children to do exactly the same thing. But then we are fighting other people and saying to them, no, but you are the one who's perpetuating this thing. And my constant question is, how are you looking at yourself? And your part in this whole argument. I can blame every white man standing out there for my position. But if I keep doing this to the people who are the closest to me, at the end of the day, the system is not going to change. Because then at the end of the day, we are 90% people of color in South Africa. So regardless of the white man sitting on the throne, we still control a lot of what is going on underneath that.
Yes. And I mean, I think we need to be very frank in saying that if we as people who have been historically oppressed cannot accept the parts of us that are women, the parts of us that are man, the parts of us that are transgender or queer, the parts of us that are a domestic worker, the parts of us that are this, that are living with disability, then how dare we go outside of our skin color to go and look for information from other communities? It just makes no sense that we are queerphobic. It just makes no sense that we are ableist. It just makes no sense that we are elitist. It just makes no sense that we have internalized manifestations of racism in our communities, and then we have the audacity to go to white people and be like, even though I struggle with affirming myself and other people, can you please affirm me? It just doesn't make any sense at all.
This is why in this conversation particularly, and I'm very keen on using a specific scripture. You know the scripture that says, I look at the splinter in your eye when there's a log in mine. You know, I'm like, all the time I'm like, but how are you actually looking at yourself? How are you really looking at how everything in your life is playing towards this narrative you're trying to fight against? How are you subconsciously teaching your children that they need to be racist against someone who looks like you because of the things that you just say and think it's a joke? Like, that's always bothered me. I can be in my colored friend circles and then 2 or 3 people are calling a white person this and a black person that, and I'm like, okay, at the end of the day, do you realize how racist you are being right now? You know, but we're too afraid to call our own people out. But we know when we're the ones speaking up, they're not necessarily going to stand next to us and say, I support you in every area, not just this one. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, even the fact that we would chase out a Zimbabwean before we chase out a German. I mean, Cape Town is full of people who come from Germany. And the prices of property are sky high because it's paid with German money. Because in Germany, things are, you know, comparatively more expensive than they are here. So in Cape Town, they can afford to make the prices sky high. But I've hardly ever seen people protesting against the influx of German people in Cape Town. But we'll protest any day. I mean, we will kick to death a person on the ground who comes from Zimbabwe or Mozambique or from Malawi. But I have yet to see that being done to a German person in Cape Town. And I'm not saying that it has to be done. I'm just saying that we need to kind of separate the conversation to say, in as much as these people have maybe migrated illegally, but what is it that drives me to be so angry? For me to fight to earn 500 Rand a week, when what we really should be fighting for is for the broader economic opportunities that enable me to earn 50,000 Rand per month. So I'm out here squabbling for the scraps. Go to advanced economies like England or the United Kingdom. Go to London. London has got a massive immigration population. And most of those people do working class jobs. And everyone gets along with each other, based on that premise. Because it just doesn't make sense that people from a particular region would be fighting to be a domestic worker, would be fighting to be a gardener, when what we should be doing is to be fighting for education so that we can go to university, so we can become engineers and doctors. But the thing that drives us to do that is because we view ourselves as being inferior. So when I look at someone from Zimbabwe, if I'm in a room of people, of black people like me, the most inferior person, the person who's right underneath me, would be a person who's a foreigner, who's not from South Africa.
Because we need to find a way to kind of put ourselves in some higher position, because we're fighting everything, trying to seem like we fit in.
Exactly. Which is how racism among people of color also exhibited itself during apartheid. I mean, think about it, that the Black Liberation Movement was led predominantly by black people. Why? Because no matter what circumstance existed, black people were black and you are at the bottom of the barrel. But people of other races benefited from having lighter skin or less curly hair or having bright eyes and assimilating more to whiteness. So for hundreds of years, people focused their energy on trying to fight to be, at the top of so people even change their surname. My surname is not Nkiza anymore, it's McLean.
Yeah, I know people personally who did that.
Exactly. So we spend so much of our time trying to go up this hierarchy that was created by white hetero patriarchy. But for black people, they were screwed either way. So they were like, oh, well, we just ought to dismantle this whole thing. But had we had the same mentality as everyone else, we probably would still be in apartheid now. Had it not been for our blackness. It's so weird how your state, the condition that you have that results in your oppression is actually the condition that leads to you fighting for your emancipation. And, my condition from an ancestral position, our condition of our blackness, of our incapability to escape our blackness, is actually the reason for the Black Liberation Movement and the reason why we had our first democratic elections in 1994.
Because it was the only option.
Because it was the only option. But where there are options, people will climb on top of each other's head so that they can be seen by white heteropatriarchy, so they can be seen by white male gaze, so they can be acknowledged by white male cisgender able-bodied elitist gaze. And until we get rid of that mentality, even in our own homes, our own communities, then we will find ourselves still being oppressed.
And I was going to ask you, what do you think the solution to all of this is? But what I'm feeling like is, like you were saying, when it's the only option, it's the one thing everyone's going to be fighting for. And we need to get back to a place where we are fighting for the one thing that is going to benefit everybody as human beings, as a human race. And I know you do talk about this in one of your articles, as a human race where everybody is at literally the same starting point, and you don't come in with your history that has benefited you and financially assisted you in wherever you are. That actually makes a lot of sense. Very, very difficult to do. because we're still dealing with mindsets here. But I really love the whole, how can I say, the way that you've broken everything down, because for me this is a learning experience. The only reason we're doing this is I needed to learn some stuff. But it's really actually putting the whole argument for this and the way that it's going right now and the way that the media is ignoring it into full context and why it's going as sourly as it's going at the moment. This, I think, is the root of the conversation. Actually opening our eyes to every single dark corner that we are avoiding because it's convenient.
Yes.
Literally just forcing ourselves to look at it all as it is without manipulating it with our own experience and point of view.
And that's the function of feminism now, is to illuminate the dark spaces and to provide everyone with an opportunity not only to see how other people have been complicit for their own oppression, but to see how that person has been complicit for the oppression of other people and also their own oppression. Because we oppress ourselves. 100%. It's just like what you were talking about with the imposter syndrome, to say that on top of the fact that just generally human beings experience imposter syndrome, I then will heighten that experience by saying, oh, but I'm also black. Oh, but I also don't look. Oh, but my hair. You know, before we step into a room, how many people have to monitor, or rather, who are the people that really have to monitor how their hair looks when they walk into a room? My body, like the shape of my body, because our bodies don't look like, you know, other people's bodies that
like the noise level when I talk. Am I too loud?
We have to monitor so many parts of ourselves. So just to kind of, seal the conversation, the starting point for me is consciousness, because as you said, it illuminates the dark spaces. But even that education becomes redundant and not unnecessary, but it becomes useless if there is no real transformation socially, and that means culturally, that means in our spiritual practices and our religious practices. So we can speak about all of this now, right? But if the environments that we are born into, because we are born into a violent society, from the moment we are born into violence. So if the communities that we are born into, if the spaces that surround us when we are birthed into the world are not transformed, then everything else falls at the wayside. And what this means for me is that we need to challenge the culture of violent initiation of boys. We need to challenge the culture of virginity testing of girls. We need to challenge the culture of female genital mutilation. We need to challenge the culture of shaming women for dressing a particular way. We need to decriminalize sex work. We need to criminalize unpaid care work. We need to criminalize unequal pay, you know. So there's so many things just socially that even before, you know, we open our eyes to everything, happen to us. And unless those spaces are not transformed, then our education is quite meaningless. But I do credit consciousness to the fact that consciousness enables people to challenge those spaces.
Yes.
So in my educating, it gives someone else the tool, someone who might be better positioned than me to challenge what we're doing culturally, what we're doing spiritually, what we're doing in our religious spaces. To say, you know, I think I understand oppression and what you're experiencing in the space, and I want to undo it. I want to undo white hetero patriarchy where I am. So 2 things: consciousness or education, as well as a very intentional, purposeful reconfiguration of our socialization as it emanates culturally, as it emanates spiritually or religiously or socially, just in our homes. So those two things feed off. If we can get those right, it will be a domino effect. Everything else will just fall into place.
Yeah.
Because the Bible was used as a mechanism to oppress women and black people historically. So if we can get it right, if we can get people with the right consciousness, with the right thinking and ideology into those spaces of influence, everything else, the economy will just, everything will just self-correct.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're moving, I'm actually getting goosebumps. I feel like we're moving into a time where the environment is becoming ready for this. Because I don't think for a long time the environment was ready for this kind of challenges in particular, because we're so in the mode of I need to protect myself no matter what. But even though the conversation now compared to a few years ago is so much richer, I think. And even if it was, I think it was highlighted by the John Floyd, the Floyd murder, but it was happening before. And South Africa especially is becoming ripe for this kind of transformation to be happening in every environment, which for me is beautiful, because I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in this time. I've seen people really look at how in the spaces that they are, how they can actually action these, these tasks and these conversations and question these businesses that are perpetuating all of the things that are happening at the moment. But I love the way that you put this in it, specifically for the people who don't think they need to educate themselves any further, how important it is for them to actually be asking all of the questions. There's no right or wrong questions. Ask all of the questions, even out of your naivete. Because at the end of the day, there is something for everyone to learn, regardless of how you look, where you're from, what you believe. I'm learning every week when I ask my white friends something that I otherwise wouldn't have known, specifically because of how I was brought up and how my upbringing has taught me to view white people. You know what I'm saying? But I really appreciate you. I really need to use you because this conversation is just like the tip of the iceberg for actually how people can really internalize some of this information and also I think at some point we need to kind of give them the resources of where you need to go and look at this. Look at your history, look before the history we think we know, and look at how it's affecting us now and how you personally have become a part of the system. Because every one of us is a part of the system in one way or the other. And it's difficult to fight whiteness when you're also enabling the system. That was a lot. But thank you so much. Oh my word. I'm going to go watch this like 5 times because I need to just, Lord, how am I not helping?
And thank you for creating the space and, having people come here to have these conversations and normalizing these conversations, because this is in of itself breaking the silence. We've normalized silence, and this is going to break that pathology. And it is my hope that these conversations will go on beyond Women's Month, beyond Heritage Month, and that we'll start normalizing this type of conversation and this type of education. So I'm so honored to be in a space, you being a person who identifies as a colored person, having such powerful conversations and holding the space. How you hold the space is so important because it will determine the outcome. So we were able to get what we got because of how you held the space. So you created the space, you're owning the space, you're leading the space, but when you hold the space, you're holding it intentionally and purposefully, and that's what we need. And thank you so much for that.
That's what Owning This Life actually is.
Yeah.
That was the groundwork purpose, girl.
Yes.
But thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Y'all need to go and meditate like I need to meditate after this, because we don't realize how we are affecting a system we're trying to fight. But no, we're going to be talking more.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I just, like, yeah.